So we will call this meeting of the Transportation Circulation Committee to order. Start with roll call.
Committee member vote. Here. Burnham.
Here.
Hoffman-Gray.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Horn.
Here.
Rodriguez. Chair Blacker.
Here. All right. No changes to the agenda. And the first item is public comment on items not on the agenda. These didn't have an agenda item number, but I'm assuming it's about the East Side plan. Okay, great. Okay. Consent calendar, I guess we're not doing minutes from our last meeting, so we'll do that at our next meeting. So, our one and only item, number 2, review of the East Side Neighborhood Management Plan. Transportation Management Plan. Yeah.
Good evening, Chair Blackerby and committee members. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm Jessica Grant, City of Santa Barbara Public Works Transportation Division. Here to talk about the East Side Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan. It's very excited to be a part of this planning effort that we've embarked on this year. It was, as you recall, council direction back in September of 2012 to look for ways to address neighborhood livability by addressing pedestrian and traffic safety related issues. So tonight, I will be presenting what the neighborhoods plan is all about. And the purpose for the meeting also is to be making a recommendation to council with respect to this plan. And I was also at the Neighborhood Advisory Council presenting this last night with to examine the funding strategies with them, and so I'll be providing an update on that. So as you recall, the East Side neighborhood is roughly bounded by Canon Perdido Street to the north, Salinas Street to the east. I admit I'm a planner without a sense of direction, so bear with me when I say my northeast-south directions. I have to pause. Highway 101 to the south, and to the west, Milpas Street. So this is not the first time that we're talking about this planning effort. I have been to the Transportation Circulation Committee back in November, where we were just introducing this whole planning effort and how we were going to do all the outreach, what the goal was, again, to address neighborhood livability by examining pedestrian and traffic safety issues. And the last time you saw me was in February of 2013, where I recapped the listening workshop, where it was held at Franklin Elementary School, where we had Eastside residents come and just tell us what their concerns were in the neighborhood. I'm not going to go through, as on the slide I have bullets of what the various concern items were, but those were the topics we talked about at that time. So what's this plan all about that you've been sent for review? Well, it's a culmination where it talks about, again, the process of how we got here, and then what are all the plan inputs. And besides the listening workshop, we also did a neighborhood survey. The target audience was East Side families, and hard copy surveys. I think I had given copies to all the board members in the as we started this process, but these were the surveys that went out to the schools: Franklin, Cleveland, Adelante, and then electronic versions went out to the junior high and high school level. We also did an electronic version where we posted on various listservs from the cities and Coast and the Bicycle Coalition to solicit more feedback. And basically what the traffic survey was reaffirmed what we heard and at the listening workshop. And in this plan effort summarizes the key findings from those surveys. I'm not going to go into all the details this evening. One item that I'll have our Derek Bailey, our traffic engineer, come up in just a minute was supplementing what we've heard from the East Side residents was an independent analysis on the traffic safety component that he'll briefly go over. So basically it's all those three inputs, and then there is approaches and strategies that I'll be focusing in detail tonight, what they're all about, and that, again, what makes up the plan. So with that, I'll take a quick pause. I'm going to have Derek Bailey just come up to describe the traffic safety element, and then I'll launch into the strategies from there.
Thank you.
Good evening. As Jessica said, when we were given direction to perform this study, one of the elements in the study was to do a crash review, and it's just another way of identifying safety problems. So part of the effort was gathering residents' input, and the other side of it is just looking strictly at the numbers. What type of crashes have been happening in the neighborhood? So when we do that, we look for trends and patterns, which is the same types of crashes repeating themselves over and over again. Any type of crash can happen just about anywhere, and it doesn't necessarily indicate a problem. It could be driver error, random fluke type thing, but if things start repeating themselves over and over, it could be an indication that there's something going on at that intersection that we should look at correcting. The area as a whole, we didn't find a whole lot. We didn't look at Milpa specifically as part of this effort because we did look at it quite thoroughly last year, but within the neighborhood itself, there really weren't a lot of patterns. The only two locations that we saw crash data that seemed to stand out from the rest of the neighborhood was at Carpinteria and Alisos and Carpinteria and Voluntario. Both of these intersections, interestingly, are the only two locations that have had bicycle and pedestrian crashes, more than one. There were a few other individual instances sprinkled around the neighborhood, but these two intersections did have repeated events happening there. So they are two locations that, just from a safety perspective, we would like to address further. In terms of how they compare to the rest of the city, they're not really that high compared to other intersections, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything there. It's interesting to note that Carpinteria and Voluntario is already an always stop. That was installed, I think, in 2001 in response to some crashes that were happening then, and it hasn't been completely effective to reduce the number of crashes, especially bicycle and pedestrian involved. So just in general, that's the two locations that just from a crash reduction standpoint, we'd like to do something at.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us back to the plan. As I discussed, there's three major sections to the Eastside Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan, which describes the process, the plan inputs, and then the plan where it goes into the strategies. So there's 6 main strategies to this plan. It's that came out from all the feedback from what we've heard from the residents. And a lot of these strategies are not, it's not just an engineering solution, or it takes on different roles. It could be an education strategy or tasks under that. It could be engineering approaches or enforcement approaches. So as we move through these strategies, I'll be discussing the various tasks that we've assigned to those. And so the strategies are improve street lighting, enhance walking experience, reduce vehicular speeds, add bicycle amenities, increase outreach on rules of the road, and improve bus stops. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is improve street lighting. And that one, from all the input from the surveys and the workshops, improved street lighting has risen to it's the top priority of Eastside residents. To many, it's lighting equals better safety in the neighborhood. And this map that I have up on the screen shows basically what the existing lighting is in the east side. So all these yellow dots are city street lights, and which are primarily make up the Milpas and Montecito corridors. And then sprinkled throughout the rest of the east side neighborhood, or it's the orange, reddish orange color. Those are the Edison lights. What's in green is what we've heard from the residents as priority lighting corridors. So, and green, the corridors primarily make up most of the neighborhood. So it's all the major streets that you could think of, from Salinas and the cross streets of Mason, Carpinteria, Voluntario, Alisos, etc. We tried to have it further prioritized from here, because just to see if we could get to a smaller target area. I would say the more dominant area, if we had to, it's still the entire neighborhood, but if we went to a phased lighting approach in the future, it'd probably start close south of Franklin and Adelante schools down towards the freeway, or would be the key areas. So as far as what we're proposing to do now, we'll continue to repair lights as needed, and also that there's a lot of vegetation currently along Milpas that was cited, that's blocking some of the existing street lights and removing some of their effectiveness, and that's on schedule with the Parks Department to be trimmed this summer. And then the biggest thing what we need to do is do a comprehensive lighting study and design. That's really the next step to address the lighting issues. That's approximately $120,000 to do lighting study and design. And then, of course, lighting, and that's the hardest part in terms of funding. This is also the biggest need and the biggest cost. It's approximately a $10 million need at this point. Without doing the study and design, we'd have better numbers once we move forward with that. But this is something on approaching, and as we continue through the design, we'd have to break it up into many phases to fund over time. The next map and strategy that I have up on the screen is the enhanced walking experience. Eastside residents, this is a community that likes to walk, and facilities to enhance that is very important. So access, like having access ramps, filling in missing sidewalk links, continues to be, it's very well liked. We've, over the past decade, have installed, I forget what I have the exact number in the report, it's approximately 90 access ramps. And so we have been, little by little, getting in ramps in the neighborhood. There's still some extra ones. What we had the East Side residents prioritize, they had about 27 ramps. Most of the location corridor would fall in Voluntario, so that's all the access ramps are the green color on this map. And as far as for missing sidewalk links, there's 6 key areas. It's on the along on Liso Street, closest to the intersections of Canon Perdido and De La Guerra. Near the roundabout is another for a missing sidewalk link that, just talking with the residents, that it's one of the routes to school, and residents have cited concerns, especially crossing over the bridge, the narrow bridge at that location. And there's another on the north side of Salinas, some missing sidewalk links, and then Old Coast Highway on the north side of Old Coast Highway. Ranging price for those missing sidewalk links is about $1.6 million, design, survey, design, construction, etc. So another issue, and this is probably the busiest map in the plan. There's a lot going on, so I'm going to take a little bit more time on this one. Another thing that we heard from the residents was just an uncomfortable crossing at intersections, citing that either people are driving or that motorists are blowing through stop signs, rolling through the stop signs, or just a failure to yield to pedestrians. And so there were several, I think 26 intersections cited of concern. And fortunately, we do have some in design to help with the crossing near. We have a project that's currently in design, funded by Measure A, right around Franklin and Adelante schools, as indicated by this orange diamond. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 5, 6, 7, about 7 locations where we'll be installing pedestrian refuge islands at various intersections near the school. It's a Safe Routes to School project. There is also under design, and I believe maybe one of the last TCC meetings or a couple, where the Safe Routes to School for Cleveland project, where we're doing a intersection realignment at Salinas and Clifton, and installing some rapid flashing beacons along Salinas as well. So that takes care of some of those intersections of concern, but there's still some remaining ones out there that the residents still have. So that translates to a funding need, and what we'd probably recommend at those intersections to seek grant funding for is more pedestrian refuge islands. It's great that the pedestrian refuge islands for the Safe Routes to School project is going to be installed within the next year, and that will be a great pilot and test case for the neighborhood to see how people are liking those improvements. And we also have some access ramps that just recently went in, and there's another round. It's just outside of the neighborhood, but right next to it, that are scheduled for next year. They're in the darker navy blue, but between the high school and junior high, you'll be seeing this coming winter some access ramp installations right there. Okay. The next strategy is to reduce vehicle speeds. The areas, the corridors that were cited for speeding concerns by the residents were, I'll name a few of the streets, Salinas and Milpas, Montecito, Carpinteria, Mason, and what we're proposing to do is we have a speed radar trailer that will be rotating over the next year and stationing it along all of those streets cited for concern, in hopes that people will self-enforce for the speed limit. One thing that around Franklin and Adelante schools along that are along the Mason Street frontage, in the school zone area, there we still have speed signs of 30 miles per hour, and we're proposing this summer to remove those and replace them with 25 mile per hour signs in the school zone area. And also that was passed out in the workshops and that are available to Eastside residents or any city resident for that matter, is to place reminders, the slow down Santa Barbara signs in their yard as another way, just for cues for motorists to drive the speed limit. We did have the police officers we had some targeted enforcement based upon these areas. The police department were not successful in issuing any speeding tickets, but we'll continue to have targeted enforcement. The police officers did observe what the Eastside residents observed of rolling the stop signs, and then I think there was one ticket for failure for pedestrian yielding as well. So as the school year begins in late August, we'll again have another targeted enforcement time. With that, we're not proposing any traffic calming measures at this time, given the other strategies. Feel that want to see how some of the other treatments go, and it's something that we'll continue to revisit and monitor. Next strategy is add bicycle amenities. The areas in blue are areas that the residents wanted to see improvements to the bike infrastructure, either lanes, mainly bicycle lanes, and we are just about to embark on a big update on our city's bicycle master plan that will be starting I think very shortly. In the next couple months, hope to have an RFP out, and we'll be working on that process for the next year. And so some of the discussion that we started with the Eastside residents will be continued in that master plan update. We were some of the just do it items. There's some of the sharrows in the neighborhood have faded, and we will be repainting those this summer. One of the just do it items that when we were working on the Zone 6 pavement maintenance update, that Haley Street has enough room to do a bicycle lane, and the only impact is the loss of 2 parking spaces. And it's very exciting, it would be from Haley and Chapala Street from downtown and go all the way to Haley and Alisos. So that's really exciting. So that will be coming in soon. But that only gets us halfway. That's from downtown to the east side. So that was one of the residents. They wanted to get to and from downtown. So we got from downtown to the east side. Mm-hmm. And as part of the bicycle master plan effort, we'll be, again, looking at ways to get from the east side to downtown. We were fortunate with Haley that it had enough right away with little disturbance. The other streets aren't as easy and require any time, and what we're seeing in the neighborhood too is any time that you can install bike lanes anywhere, but then you have to give up parking, on-street parking, and one thing that we've heard from the survey and workshops that on-street parking is very important to this neighborhood. So we had suggested to do bicycle lanes on Milpas and Montecito streets, and I think the conversation to be continued. It was kind of from the approach workshop about a 50-50 split, people wanting to know a little bit more. So we'll be revisiting that discussion. The other items that we talked about were the concept of bicycle priority corridors or bicycle boulevards, where you don't get rid of any on-street parking, and you have signage and some engineering work to some of the intersections where you basically give priority to the bicyclists. Motorists are still allowed to drive on those streets, but it won't be appealing for a motorist to take that as a shortcut street. Something would slow the motorist down, either by changing the direction of the stop signs or something else, but they would still continue to drive. But it would also be, there would be cues to just expect more bicycle riders. And so that concept was floated for Cacique Street, Soledad Street, which runs next to Eastside Park and the schools and the Franklin Center, and Aliso Street. So we'll continue the discussions with that. One of the things, the next strategy was increase outreach on rules of the road. The thing that we heard loud and clear is that you couldn't point the finger at somebody's, that it's all the motorist's fault or all the pedestrians' fault. It's basically an agreement is that motorists, pedestrians, and bicyclists could all be doing a better job. And so, and this is something that we have programmed in for next year, is to develop a rules of the road, like brochure and maybe some other outreach, little commercials, public service announcements that we'd be moving forward with, addressing, again, how motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists all could be doing a better job. One of the things during this outreach effort, and it was a lot of fun to do, it was called, it was a pilot project, and we called it Eastside Rides, and it was a partnership that was formed with Traffic Solutions, who puts on Cyclemania every year, and Eastside Rides became one of the Cyclemania events. And it was, besides Traffic Solutions, it was a partnership with the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition and Coast. And it ended up being a very successful event. There was about 57 participants. 37 of those were kids, and ranging in age probably from 4 to junior high age, and then 20 adults. And it was all about rules of the road for cycling and learning different skills and how you can be a better driver of your bicycle. And it was a bilingual presentation that we gave, that the Bicycle Coalition, fantastic presentation. And then we did some bicycle skills, and then we went around the neighborhood for a little ride. And especially with kids, it's really important because a lot of times your bicycle radius is only maybe 2 miles, or you're just getting to school or getting to the park, and wanting to make kids and adults comfortable riding in their neighborhood. So because of the success for this, it's something that we want to continue and maybe do hold another Eastside Rides event in September. And if it's well received again, we want to continue maybe through other neighborhoods in the city. So that's just one example of an outreach effort. And the city will depend heavily on these partnerships to in the community to really make it come alive. And because I think with rules of the road, you can't overemphasize enough. As a mom of 2 young kids, I'm constantly, every day, watch for cars, but do this, and it's just a message that keeps needing to be repeated. Next one is improve bus stops. Before I go into details of this section, I did want to pause for one moment because part of this, when it comes to the bus improvement section, it's a partnership between the city and the Metropolitan Transit District, and we have a member on the TCC at MTD, and she just wanted to take a minute just to say just something real quick, or I can.
I'm sorry, I don't remember
Okay.
exactly what I was supposed to say, but
Right.
that I can listen to the presentation, right?
Yes.
And then when it comes to a vote, I just will not vote on anything bus stop related.
You should not vote on anything bus stop related or provide any input bus stop related because
Right.
you are an employee of MTD. But as far as the overall plan, you can vote on the overall plan.
Okay.
And this body is recommending to the city council. So you're not a policy committee in this regards.
Right. Okay.
All right, thank you. Yes. So, bus stop, with respect, what we were trying to discuss in this section when we went out to for the residents to seek input was, well, we first want to know, is there any impediments getting to and from the bus stops that need to be improved? So some of that falls into the enhanced walking experience of access ramps, missing sidewalk links, etc., and a kind of experience at the bus stops as well. So the bus shelters at the bus stops continue to be very popular. And it's a little bit hard to see on this map that I have up, but in the green squares are areas where we have bus shelters. And the orange squares are ones without shelters. And we had asked the residents, or is there any input if we had to install some more shelters, where would those be? And they're right indicated in blue. You'll see it better in your packet. But Milpas, Yananali, and Milpas at Mason. Those were areas that the city and MTD have already had on their radar. And we already know that we're dealing with some right-of-way constraints at those locations. But it's not to say that we can't do bus shelters there. It just means that our standard prefabricated bus shelter that you see in our city wouldn't fit at that location. So it'd be a modified version of that. But when it comes to the next round of our CDBG grant cycles, we could still move forward with applying for grants for that. It just, the bus shelters might be slightly more because of the modified design. And another issue that we're still exploring was having some more trash cans available at the bus stops. The conversation still needs to be continued, but some of the complaints were that there's adjacent property owners kind of abusing the public trash can, just having putting their personal trash in there, and then it becomes an issue of trash pickup frequency and all of that. But those are all things that the city and MTD and we can address. So it'd be something to the tune of maybe putting in about 10 more trash cans at the bus stops. So this slide is not meant to be read here, but this is, I'll reference you to page 19 of the plan, and that what I discussed during my presentation are all the tasks that we're proposing to do to under these strategies. So everything in the black ink is what we can do already in our streets capital budget. We're planning to, they're just do-its. We're planning to address the projects that are already in design. The areas in red are the funding need. So I'm actually not, I'm going to move. So on page 22, or is it 22? No, 20. it separates them out of tax funded by the streets capital, and then again the ones below that are the funding need. So to get to the bottom line, what's great is we're able to fund about I think there were 28 tasks identified between all of the 6 strategies. 18 of those we're proposing to do in the next year or two, and so that's really exciting that we're able to move forward on a decent chunk of this plan. The items, there's 10 remaining items that are the funding need, to the tune of $16 to $19 million need. So that's a lot of money, and the big chunk of that on that $16 to $19 million need is $10 million is for the lighting.
Yeah.
So we're discussing some of the funding strategies last night with the Neighborhood Advisory Council. And Brenny, did you want to pick it up from here, or do you want me to? Okay, so the recommendation last night at the Advisory Council, and again, this is just in draft because it just happened. They haven't had adopted their minutes yet, but as I understand the language, was the Neighborhood Advisory Council appreciates, endorses, and would like to see the East Side Transportation Management Plan be a priority. The Neighborhood Advisory Council would like to continue with the current process for CDBG funding. And the Neighborhood Advisory Council would like City Council to consider designating money from the general fund towards these projects. Some of the projects they highlighted of the $16 and $19 million need was to, if we had to do some immediate tasks, it would be to fund the lighting, do the lighting study and design, and target the sidewalk infill areas, access ramps, and bus shelters and the trash cans. So that's where they left it. I can explain that more, but I'll leave it to Browning to discuss the funding.
Well, as this committee knows, John Wojcik was before this committee last fall to talk about our 6-year capital improvement program, and we have capital needs that far exceed the amount of money that we have available. So we have a funding gap in terms of doing our current maintenance need, let alone trying to build anything new. So Streets Capital, our Measure A money, and the UT that we get to go towards Streets Capital is limited in terms of what we can use those money for. We recently applied for Measure A grant funding through Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, and we were successful in getting 4 projects funded and 1 project partially funded. And one of the projects that did get funded were the pedestrian refuge islands in the east side and the west side. But the next cycle for Measure A is in 3 years. So it comes up every 3 years. So that's not really something we can count on immediately. The state of California just recently opened a request for projects for the federal Safe Route to School program, and we took a look at it. But when the federal government did another continuing resolution for the MAP 21, they put the Safe Route to School program into the HSIP pot of money. So Caltrans is applying the Highway Safety Improvement, which is HSIP, regulations on the Safe Route to School, which means you have to have a traffic safety issue, which is supported by collision data. And so the intersections that we were looking at applying for Safe Route don't qualify because the traffic collision data is, frankly, it's a little old, too old. And it's outside the window that they would consider. The state of California has not released the state Safe Route to School program yet, and my understanding is the governor is taking a look at how that's going to be put together. One proposal was lumping all the alternative monies into one pot and not have a separate bicycle transportation account and Safe Route to School, so that's still unknown at this point in time, and if he does do it, it's going to be even more competitive than it has been in the past. So that leaves us with general fund money, which we don't get general fund money to do streets capital. That's a policy decision by the city council. or the community development block grant funds. And we apply for those money alongside of the nonprofit organizations in the city. And the Community Development and Human Services Committee reviews all the application, interviews all the applicants, and makes recommendation to council. And so going through that process, there is no guarantee that we will receive funding via those money. So we have a significant funding gap in terms of being able to move forward with these projects. So just want to have it out there. We're going to have the same conversation with the city council, because we know the residents want something done, and we are taking care of quite a bit of things with our existing resources and the grants we've already received. But grant opportunities in the future, it's going to be a few years before we're going to see additional grant opportunities outside the community development block grant monies.
As far as for the TCC, what staff is recommending is for the TCC to find the Eastside Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan consistent with the circulation element of our general plan, and to recommend to council for adoption of this plan tonight. And with that, I conclude my presentation and be happy to entertain any questions.
Okay. We can take some questions from the committee, and then I have 3 public comment slips. So no comments yet, just questions to clarify, and then we'll move to public comment. Anyone?
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
Maybe this is a question for Ms. Bosch. Under number 6, has there anything been charted or mapped out as far as bus bench repair or replacement, and also maybe the installation of concrete pads where there might be dirt at a bus stop to better accommodate a person in a wheelchair?
Am I okay to answer that?
Use the mic, please. Turn it on. Sorry.
It's an ongoing process. As you know, we have more than 800 bus stops in the system, and a great many of them need those kinds of improvements, and we are making them as fast as we can within the budget that we have, and based on priorities such as boardings and so forth. The CDBG process has been really helpful in helping us do that in terms of when we put a shelter in, then the concrete also happens. That makes it a more accessible bus stop. But
Yeah, we do work closely with MTD staff in developing our community development block grant application, and we've been successful over the last few years to get grant funding to install bus shelters that have solar panels on it to provide lighting, and we've put in quite a few bus shelters already on the east side as well as the west side, and quite a few on Milton Street. But I think we'll be continuing to work with them to identify additional locations to install bus shelters. So it's an ongoing process. I think they're strapped for the capital just like the city is.
Chair Blackerby, I have 2 questions.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. I have an engineering question and then an interdepartment communication question. So first off, the engineering question, and I noticed Mr. Bailey is here in the audience. In terms of the pedestrian median refuge islands that I believe are already funded through Measure A, and the specifics of the engineering of that, I know you mentioned Aliso, Soledad, Cacique, and one other potential for future bicycle boulevards as we have more of that capacity with the upcoming bike master plan. I'm wondering if the design of those pedestrian median refuge islands would have an eye towards future compatibility with a bicycle boulevard use.
The intention of the refuge islands is primarily for pedestrians. If you notice the location of the proposed...
Microphone out.
There we go. Better. If you notice the location of the proposed median refuge islands, they're not in locations where potential bike boulevards will be at this time. Yeah, we're looking potentially at Alisos and Soledad streets for bicycle boulevards. Good example is the intersection of Carpinteria and Alisos. And initially what we're planning on doing there is just adding some red curb to improve visibility. It is possibly a location where median refuge islands could go in the future, but until we figure out just what a bike boulevard could look like in Santa Barbara, we don't want to jump and install anything at those intersections just yet. The bike boulevards intended to give priority to bicycles. So the median refuge islands, the directionality of them aren't going to be in the same direction as a potential bicycle facility. In terms of how a bicycle would navigate around them, most of the streets in this neighborhood are take the lane type thing. There aren't any bike lanes in the neighborhood now. There could be potentially come out of the bike master plan, but those streets that were identified by the residents are different from those streets where we're going to be implementing these.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Just because I see the separation of the slowing down traffic, making crossing easier, and facilitation of community bike routes. And I also notice obviously those are going to work in tandem together because those three together help achieve the same goal. The other question in terms of interdepartment communication, I mentioned enforcement. And I remember about a year ago or 9 months ago when we got state data out that something like Santa Barbara County was like the third most dangerous county for bicyclists specifically, or maybe bicyclists and pedestrians. There was a bike sting operation by PD. And I'm wondering if there have been conversations, I know there have been conversations in the past with the police department about doing, when there are bike enforcement, because obviously those are very significant tickets, if there's some type of future tie-in with education, kind of like traffic school, like UCSB has, or like other communities have for bicyclists.
Yeah.
I mean, we had that conversation about a year or so ago with the police department, and then Sarah left. We've talked about like a bicycle court or something like that. We're going to have that conversation again. As the committee knows, we got the Measure A grant to do the update to the bike master plan, and we're going to invite the police department to be one of our stakeholders so we can have that conversation about one, additional enforcement, educational component, as well as alternatives to getting a ticket, a $300 ticket for running a red light or stop sign versus community service or something like that, because it's an expensive ticket, especially a lot of our bicyclists. That's the only form of transportation that they have. So we want to be careful, but we also want them to obey the traffic laws, and education is going to be a key component of this effort.
Cool.
So, and to continue what Mr. Allen was saying, that is on our task list. It's on from page 19. It's number 25 to work with police department and courts to establish a bike safety class to be taken in lieu of bicyclists paying a fine for violations. So that's something in the fiscal year 2014. So that begins July. That we would now with our mobility coordinator returning. That we'll pick up those conversations again, and ideally, yeah, as far as for targeted enforcement, because we'll continue to do rules of the road outreach, and so we probably plan to time certain enforcement efforts associated with the educational efforts as well, and a lot of it. We did hear a lot from the residents that some of them on bicyclists, they would rather just take the ticket because they feel more comfortable riding their bike on the sidewalk. They don't feel comfortable on the street. So, that pilot program that we did for the East Side Rides for the Bicycling is to help lessen those fears and how to feel comfortable riding your bike in the street and why that is safer. But it's something that it will continue to take work and outreach to address.
Cool. And one last question, again with enforcement. What was the reason that there were difficulties actually giving speeding tickets when there were those targeted police actions? Was it something to do with like certain thresholds or?
Well, we last fall before when we went to the city council to get direction on doing the neighborhood effort, Mr. Bailey went out and did a quick analysis of what the current speeds are. And the cars, the 85th percentile, is what we use to set the speed limit. And the majority of the cars were driving close to the 85th percentile, so the posted speed limit. So when they were out there, they did not have any cars that exceeded the speed limit to a point where it was unsafe, where they can give a speeding ticket that would be upheld by the courts. So from a law enforcement standpoint, the cars weren't exceeding the speed limit that would justify them giving a speeding ticket. That doesn't mean that the residents are wrong, that cars are driving too fast. They might be driving too fast for the comfort of a resident, but from a law enforcement standpoint, they weren't. So that was the issue.
So even slight speeding because of that percentile rule, even though going 10 miles an hour faster than say 25 miles an hour has a significant added risk for a pedestrian or for a bicyclist, just the technical mechanism that the courts would uphold makes it tricky to enforce speeding. Is that kind of the?
That's a good way of characterizing it. And they didn't find anybody going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. At the time they were out there doing the enforcement.
And are most of the speed limits more like 30? You mentioned trying to reduce down in the school zone to 25. Are most of the school speed limits in the area 30, or what's the median?
The only two streets in the neighborhood that have a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, excuse me, Milpas and Salinas Streets. Mason is currently posted at 30, but there's no supporting speed survey for that, so we're just going to be taking the signs down. The rest of the speed limits in the neighborhood, they're predominantly 25. There's a few that are undefined, which is kind of a legal no man's land. It just means that there hasn't been a speed survey done on those streets, so it kind of defaults to what's ever reasonable and proper. But by and large, they're all 25 mile an hour, with the exception of the more major streets on the perimeter of the neighborhood that are 30.
Cool. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, we can go to public comment. Got Catherine Mullen to be followed by Eric Schwartz. Looks like Catherine's not here anymore. What's that? Oh, okay. All right. Go for it.
So, I attended both East Side meetings.
Speaking to the
Close
mic.
to the mic.
I attended both East Side meetings and most of the Plan Santa Barbara meetings. I want to say they did a great job of working with pedestrians, the lighting, the bus stops, and the outreach and rules of the road mediocre, and dealing with cyclists is, I would rate it as miserable or embarrassing or dangerous or all the above. And I mean, I've been riding here since the 70s. 70s were nice, the 80s were nice. Most people had bumper stickers on their bikes that said, "Bicycle if you love Santa Barbara." And if you saw somebody you knew in a car and you knew they were just going around town, people would look at them like, "Why are you in a car?" That was the culture of Santa Barbara across the board. Everyone rode a bike. It reached a threshold with influx from Los Angeles or wherever people moved from in the late 80s and certainly in the 90s, where the population and the automobile traffic increased enough to where the people who had been cycling then felt unsafe cycling joined the motorists. So now you have not just the influx of new population, but you have the ex-cyclists who are now become motorists. And I'd say 60% of my friends joined that because they had children, they felt unsafe. By the late 80s and early 90s, it was just not safe. It's worse now Santa Barbara was, up until the early 2000s, one of the 10 top-rated cities in the country for cycling, cycle-friendly cities. It's now not on the top 50 today. It's not in the top 100, contrary to what Browning Allen might find somewhere on the internet. I've never found it, and it's certainly not in the top 100 in any of the listing sites that I've looked for many searches. So that's been in our tenure. We've watched Santa Barbara degrade from the top 10 to not even on the charts for cycling safety. Now, this plan is great, and I support it for all the improvements, aside from two factors: reducing speed of motorists, and I think I could speak for Dr. Mullen too. She had to leave, but we discussed this at length, and she was also at the meetings. And this plan is a little bit embarrassing because what it calls for is self-enforcement for motorists, people driving basically lethal weapons if you're a pedestrian or a bicyclist. So they're on self-enforcement because of legal technicalities or whatever the excuse is. Meanwhile, not me or anybody I know, but children, young adults, recent immigrants, those are the people on the sidewalks. Those are the people riding a bicycle on the sidewalk. And they're on there because they're scared. I'm not scared on the street. I could take the roundabout at Milpas and clear it. I'm not the least bit afraid. But these people are, and I'm here on their behalf because I'll ride anywhere, and it's not a problem. Excuse me. So $300 ticket for somebody who has no other way to get around but a bicycle for riding on the sidewalk, because we've driven them, as the leaders of this city, we've driven them off the streets onto the sidewalk. And this plan that Jessica is proposing is for increased enforcement of those cyclists, yet self-enforcement for the motorists. And this is absurd. This is contrary to all the objectives that the city has had, working with the EDC, the fossil-free by 33 objective. All these things are just thrown out. Cycling is what the city needs to increase just to get back where we were in the late 90s, early 2000s. We've got to go. We're not trying to make improvements. All these other things are really important and good improvements for pedestrians. We're not trying to improve cycling. We just want to get it back where it was before the influx of automobile traffic, speeding. Now, I'm not sure what the engineer Derek Bailey's speeding surveys go, but we've done speeding surveys on Clifton and Quiniento Street, and 85th percentile was 10 to 15 miles an hour above the speed limit. And we did everything we could and worked with the city council and did all the petitions and all the speed hump proposals. None of it went anywhere. Browning Allen just dropped the ball years ago on that, did nothing there. So, most of the people in our neighborhood didn't even go to that, to the East Side meeting because they were really felt like City Hall will not listen. They don't care. I tried to convince them.
Could you wrap up in
Yeah.
a minute?
So
or
basically, we've got a few little minor efforts like sharrows that last probably because of the paint, not because the city isn't trying, but because they use the wrong paint. Sharrows last 2 to 4 weeks, and then they're so faded they're not even visible to a car. So any of the sharrow projects, they get repainted every year or so, but they're only good for maybe 4 weeks. Same with the new crosswalk intersections. So there's a paint problem, but more than anything, there's this problem with the east side, which is self-enforcement for motorists and increased ticketing and enforcement for cyclists. And that's not a good plan. It's not a holistic plan to reduce automobile traffic, which helps reduce speeding, which helps the whole process. So if you can get people out of their cars onto bikes, it helps with crime, it helps with pedestrian safety, it helps with bicycle safety, it helps with congestion, it helps with air quality. There's nothing good that it doesn't do, and everything bad that does happen when you crack down on cyclists. It's good to educate them, and I teach cycling to police officers who are afraid to ride on the street. I mean, I do these things, and it's not. This plan is not going the right way in terms of cycling or enforcement of speeding motorists in the east side.
Thank you.
Here's just
I recognize that I did not say it's 3 minutes for public comment, and I gave you 6. So
that's okay. I took
yeah.
Catherine Mullins' 3.
Okay.
To me.
All right.
So here's a little picture for
Safe enough.
everybody. Albert Einstein making free riding his bike. Santa Barbara. You
Great.
can do that today, not just because he's dead, but it's probably not safe enough.
Thanks. Next, Eva Enbar.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Eva Inbar. I'm West Coast, and I've been very involved in the East Side for the past 3 years or so through our East Side Walks project. So much so that my husband suggests I just move there. So I feel quite at home there. And I've had the opportunity to watch this process here, the traffic management process, unfold close up. I attended the 2 workshops and I watched Public Works, and I was impressed. I really have to give them credit. You know, they came out here and in the East Side, and they did those workshops, and they listened to people actually that sat at these tables with the people on their Saturday mornings. So it was a huge amount of work, I think, that went into this, and we appreciate it. We support it. Especially Jessica Grant, I want to recognize. She put an enormous amount of effort into this, and she found some creative approaches to kind of penetrate that cosmos. That's the East Side. It's kind of a world unto its own. It's special. And she was able to connect with the residents, just the ordinary people. And they appreciated particularly, I think, that she's a mom with young children. They felt that connection. So that was good. That was really good. The plan here has a lot of good things. It's a solid, no-nonsense, practical approach. We support it, and we urge you to support it too. We feel that maybe since this was going to be a phased project with near-term, mid-term, and long-term approaches, it should be reevaluated regularly. And we would like to see some language to that effect included. Follow-up, evaluation, with maybe timelines so we don't forget. After 1 year, after 2 years, after 3 years, we look at it again and we see how is this working that we've done? How is this coming? And then we can go to maybe some of the more long-term things that are envisioned here, but not really, recommended for now. And that could include some follow-up on reducing traffic speeds. And I have to, I had some of the thoughts that my fellow speaker had, that maybe just self-enforcement for motorists is not enough. So we would maybe like to see a little bit more there in that department. But let's see how this works. What we're doing here, it's great. It's very solid, and we support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Thank you. Sorry, good evening. My name is Nathan Alley. I'm an East Side resident. I live on Gutierrez between Alisos and Voluntario. And I wasn't actually going to say anything, but I definitely support the plan. Anything related to bike safety and biking improvements, I completely support because I ride a lot. But one concept just occurred to me as I was listening to various people. The idea that there's enforcement for vehicles on the road and vehicles on the sidewalk. I think everything's a vehicle, right? Under the code. I don't know why it would have to be exclusive or separate in any way, shape, or form. If you're out there patrolling and enforcing one, why aren't you looking at the other? I think we probably could use more police presence just in general, enforcing various traffic violations on the East Side, and might as well pay attention to everybody at the same time equally. So I would just suggest that that's not an either-or situation. I do like the idea of the community education as opposed to fine, or at least having that option, because I understand why people ride their bikes on the sidewalk. I wish they would stop. But I also think that, making them pay a lot of money for the problem is not probably the way to go. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe you could fill out a speaker slip.
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Retroactively, please. Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay, so we can, back to the committee, we can have more questions and comments. Yeah, Ms. Horn?
I just have a question about if you have an idea how many tickets are given for people riding on the sidewalk.
I don't have a number, but it's very few, if any, that are given. You know, when the police department did the enforcement on State Street, they primarily were looking at people who were not abiding by the traffic laws, running red lights, whether on the cross streets or on State Street, or riding the wrong way on the street, like running the upstream on the one-way street, like Anacapa Street, for example.
Are you talking bikes?
Bicycles. So when we're talking about bicycle enforcement, we're talking about obeying the traffic laws and not so much riding on the sidewalk. You know, if you have a school-age kid, I think the police officers use their discretion whether or not they're going to stop a school-age child for riding on the sidewalk versus riding in the street, especially depending upon the street. But again, the reason you don't see a lot in this document in terms of bicycling is because we're going to do an update of the bicycle master plan, and that's where we're going to talk about bicycling. You know, not in this document. It's too soon to do it in this document because we're going to be embarking on the bike master plan. That's why it's not in here.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, the person who spoke before, Ms. Inbar, Eric, I think was his name, I agree with a lot of his comments. I'm just wondering what can be done in terms of any additions or adjustments to this plan to increase enforcement, police enforcement or otherwise, of motor vehicles rather than self-enforcement.
You know, we could ask the police department to come out and do enforcement, and they'll spend some time out there doing enforcement. They're going to come back right around the time school starts to do enforcement. When they were out here the last time, they did enforcement for roughly 2 or 3 weeks in the month of April, and they issued tickets. But the tickets they issued, I believe they issued right around 30 to 35 tickets. All but one of those tickets for failure to yield or stop at a stop sign, and one was for failure to yield to a pedestrian. They have done pedestrian yielding enforcement on Milpa Street before and after we did the improvements. They have issued a number of tickets for failure to yield to the right-of-way for a pedestrian. But they have done enforcement for vehicle speeds on Milpa Street as well as Salinas Street and have not been able to issue any speeding tickets because cars were driving enough over the speed limit where a speeding ticket would be upheld in court, or they were driving the speed limit for that matter. But they weren't able to issue speeding tickets is the bottom line in that respect. You know, we'll ask them to go out there again and do enforcement. But if they're not successful in issuing speeding tickets or any tickets for that matter, there's other areas in this community where there's a higher need to do enforcement. So they'll focus their resources where they know there is the biggest need to do an enforcement effort. So, but they will, at our request, go in there and do another enforcement. If they're successful, they'll go back again and do it again. One of the things we have to remember, even if a car drives 5 miles over the speed limit, the driver can go to traffic court, and the officer needs to say, well, the reason we gave them a ticket, they exceeded the speed limit and their speed was unsafe for the conditions of the road at the time. And it's really up to the judge to determine whether or not they're going to uphold the speeding ticket or not. You know, so they're just the enforcement. It's really up to the courts whether or not they're going to assess a fine or not.
So hopefully we're not sending the message out to people that you can go 5 miles over the speed limit and you'll be fine if you end up going to court. Don't speed. Mr. Burnham?
No,
You done? Okay. Ms. Horton, do you have another question?
Just a note that, and Eva probably could speak to this a lot better than myself because she's worked with Safe Routes to School for so many years, since I've been involved with Safe Routes to School also for about 10 years. And when school starts and when efforts are made at the different schools to improve safety, there's been really great cooperation, but not much funding for motorcycle policemen to do some enforcement at the schools. And it's not speeding that is the issue, as you say. You know, it's people talking on the cell phone and, you know, rolling stops and parking at the red zone, you know, and dropping off their kids and impeding other traffic and all those kinds of things. So, to me, those are the kinds of things that we need to focus on. Not, I can see, you know, speeding is not really the issue.
Okay. Other comments, questions? questions? Oh, yeah, Mr. Kaufman-Gray?
Yeah, just a couple here. I'm one of the few people, I think, Browning's involved with all three of the neighborhood traffic management programs in the city. And, you know, one of the first ones, the East Side, it took a long time from start to, just to get from where we are now, I don't know how long, but it's must have been a couple of years from when they had the first workshops to actually when the plan went to city council. And then the years afterwards, by the time things were starting to be constructed, and by the time that happened, most of the people that were involved at the beginning no longer even lived in the area, and we all know what happened after that. It was just a major neighborhood outcry about what is this being built in this neighborhood. And I just want to commend the city for, September 2012 to now to starting to work with the workshops and do the 2 workshops and actually come up with a plan, I think is just remarkable to do it within 9 months. And we have projects that are actually being constructed or on the drawing boards right now that are in this plan. So it's not like we're not going to have anything happening from this plan. They're already in the works, which I think is also remarkable. Now, sure, there's a lot of things in here that there's just not going to be the money for right away. But that happens with every plan. I mean, there's still areas in the East Side, there's still plans in the Oak Park that more things would like to be done, but there's still not the money. So I just want to commend the city and staff for, and the residents for coming out and for these workshops. I mean, I only went to the first one, and I was very impressed with the demographics and all the people that did show up to be involved in their community. So I'm really, sure there's things that we wish we could maybe tweak a little bit more, but, we don't have $16 million to get everything done at once. There's a lot of other neighborhoods that would like to have their plans completed too. So I think this is a great start, and I definitely can support this, and looking forward to seeing it completed.
Yeah. Other questions, comments? Yeah, Mr. France?
Chair Blackerby, I always have long, verbose comments. I, again, really appreciate the city's work on this plan. To echo the comments of Mr. Kaufman-Gray, the process, I was able to attend the first workshop and see the process kind of from the sidelines from there. And it's definitely been a great engagement of diverse, groups within our community. And I appreciate the city's efforts on this and look forward to this going to council and as we can make things happen. Obviously, we have speed and motor vehicle issues that, in general, are perceived as not compatible with a residential neighborhood, and I think that's a tricky part of the East Side. It is kind of a throughway for a few different neighborhoods for Santa Barbara, and even though it's a residential neighborhood that's right by our city center, it's a tough neighborhood for bicyclists and pedestrians. In Mr. Allen's comments about in terms of what we can take on now, it's a really good point. I think there's not a lot of tools in the toolbox for bicycling right now, and I think that's somewhat represented within this plan. There's really not a lot, aside from a focus of kind of core routes that were mentioned by Eastside residents. There's not a lot that this plan can seemingly take on right now for bicycling, which is really too bad, because there's, it's been said there's a lot of people who walk in the East Side, and there's certainly a lot of people who drive in the East Side. And one thing that you can infer from the comments is people are intimidated from biking. So there's this gap. So again, even though it's a residential neighborhood that's right next to all this employment and civic life, people are too intimidated to bike. And so it's hard for people who are too intimidated to bike to then make comments about what they want in terms of bike infrastructure. Because the reality is there's no bike infrastructure on the East Side. I mean, basically there's zero. However, we can do what we can do. One thing I'll mention, really look forward to, in the Bike Master Plan, a further elaboration on the Bicycle Boulevard discussion, which is something that a lot of residents kind of alluded to, but we don't even know the language of what a bicycle boulevard is. I was actually at a Planning Commission meening for Goleta last week, and the Cal Poly group presented about a WUNRF, right? This is not even a word in our language, but this is, a word for a residential or shared street where vehicles are basically going less than 15 miles an hour, right? Again, this is just not part of our lexicon. We don't know about it, and we have to add that tool to our toolbox because I think there are routes, and certainly the city's work with Sycamore Creek and the new bridge for Cacique, and hopefully perhaps funding for a bridge to Soledad as well in that junction could help have some quiet, safely connected and lit residential streets that can also serve, bicyclists and pedestrians. The other thing I'll say is, funding is limited, right? But funding represents community priorities. I think it's like did some rough back of the envelope calculations, and what we're going to spend on 101, something like $3,800 per South Coast resident, right? And we're talking about bike ped expenditures of about $5 a year. So, that's the reality that we live in, right? Also, a lot of stuff that we would want, and I would say, especially for reducing vehicle speeds and adding bicycle infrastructure and generally making it more livable, pedestrian-friendly environment, are trade-offs between convenience and speed and talking on our phone while we're driving and doing other things, right? And quality of life. And on-street parking is part of that, right? When things are really crowded, at some point, the discussion is going to have to come up, right? Do we want improved quality of life? I'd love to park my car, and I have a car, and I park it on my street in front of my house, right? But that's for convenience. That's not for quality of life. And hopefully as part of the bike master plan, we can get into that and have a community discussion about that, because otherwise, in a compact urban environment, we can't have it all. Thank you for your work on this, and I really hope as part of future efforts that we can make the East Side more livable and safe.
Other comments? Ms. Bosch?
Real quick, I support everything that both Ed and Keith said. And I really look forward to getting into the bicycle master plan. But I'm kind of wondering, I know that council has sort of prioritized the east side recently. And so I'm wondering if strong bicycle language in the bicycle master plan is not going to be heeded as well as whatever language is in this plan. Can you give me a sense of how that's going to go?
It's hard to say how the city council would react to that, but in terms of anything we do in terms of bicycling, funding is also the issue. So when we do update the bicycle master plan, that gives us a new blueprint as to what we can do in going after grant funding, whether it be through the bicycle transportation account program or the next cycle of Measure A. So if we have an updated bicycle master plan where we identify capital improvement projects, then it gives us something that we can use to apply for grant funding, so we know what the community needs are. So the east side is a springboard to looking at bicycling in the bike master plan. If we were trying to do more for bicycling in this document, we would probably spend another year, because we would have to do a lot more research and engage in the community and other folks. And I think there was a desire on the city council's part to get this plan done and get the plan done before the end of the fiscal year, early summer, through council, so we can address the concerns that the residents have expressed.
Other comments? Well, first of all, I want to say how impressive the whole planning effort was from what I saw, and with the outcome. I think it's a kind of a fresh perspective and a fresh way to look at it. I wasn't involved in the previous neighborhood transportation management plan, but I know that this is an improvement. I do notice the improvement just based on community response, or the community response that I saw from the last one. So this is great, and I think moving forward in this city, the next time we do one of these, this is a really good template. I'm sure there are things you would improve or do differently, but it's a really good way, and it makes it easy to look at what we can do now and what we need to figure out next. I'm also really excited that the bicycle master plan update is finally going to happen. It's so overdue, and I know that it's something that once you have that updated plan, much with the pedestrian master plan, you're referring to that every time you're dealing with something, any type of improvement or bicycle improvement or an area where there's bicycle facility or not, that informs everything that the division does. So I think that's really exciting and important. I look forward to that process, which I'm sure will have wonderful outreach like this one. The next thing is, when is this going to council?
We are going to the City Council on July 23rd, and it will be a evening meeting at 6 p.m. at City Hall.
Great. And hearing what the Neighborhood Advisory Council had to say about requesting that the City Council look for general fund monies for this, in addition to obviously using what we have in the already programmed for capital. I don't know all the ins and outs of the city budget, but I know that things are looking better. There are also a lot of different departments and things waiting for it to get better to grab that first batch of money to use it for whatever project. I don't think it's a terrible idea to be able to have the council contemplate that. Maybe for, just a piece. Obviously, they're not going to say, okay, here's $19 million. Like, just get it all done all at once. But I guess I know in the prioritization kind of layout of this, it seemed like street lighting was number one. I'm wondering if there, if there were a phased approach of saying, okay, we're going to give this much general fund money this year, this much next year, kind of map it out down the road to phase it in. I'm just kind of trying to think sort of, and we don't even have the money yet, but what would be best of like, okay, do some, obviously the lighting design and the study would be an initial thing because you're not just going to throw up lights. But I'm wondering, like, do you fill in some sidewalks and put in some lights once you have some money, or do you do all the sidewalks and then do all the lights? I'm just wondering if there's some kind of strategy around that.
Yes, quick answer. Yes, there is a strategy. There's different on behalf of the East Side residents, and for what we heard, yes, it was lighting, and I would say what's coming in second is items to enhance the walking experience. So those pedestrian refuge islands, curb extensions, access ramps, sidewalk infill. So that's the next, and then from there. It was from this approach workshop, we were polling more on some of the engineering approaches, but of course, unanimous for the increased outreach, of course, and the kind of no-brainer bus stops. Those ones are kind of the lower, the ones that hopefully we can just do it. Once grant funding, they're not very expensive, and the bicycling amenities again were very favorable as well. The Haley bike path received a lot of positive praise, and that's what's nice about the bike, because we're allowed on this effort to do 2 workshops, and so to continue that conversation again, to kind of pick up where we left off, to further explain for the bike path and more the concept of the bicycle priority corridors, what that sort of looks like. We're excited to branch into the next phase. So that's from the East Side residents' perspective. The Neighborhood Advisory Council is given these funding priorities. What they were talking about in their meeting last night is of the funding needs, we'll try and tackle the ones that are sort of the least expensive improvements, and if you can find grant money, to go out and do it. And their recommendation is if there is any extra general fund money, just get those. And so those items were like the lighting study design, because with anything for the bigger lighting improvements, you have to have this sort of a design in place to make it more appealable when we do apply for grants. And like access ramps, sidewalk info, bus shelter, those are more easier, just do it type projects. With respect to the engineering hat of our streets capital, the way we prioritize improvements, there's categories, and I know we've talked about our CIP rankings before, but rising to the top is always if there's any apparent safety issues, and then maintaining what we have for existing infrastructure. So we own 238 road miles in the city, and that's already a lot to maintain. So that's sort of the focus of our streets capital. Again, with the streets capital hat on for the safety improvement, the only one that's unfunded of a traffic safety improvement is the Carpinteria of Ontario. So that's an intersection of concern for us that we would, if we had some grant funding, would like to move forward on to increase the visibility at that intersection. So 3 different perspectives, and that will be shared again at City Council on the 23rd, 22nd? 23rd.
I have a question for
Yeah. Sorry, that was kind of my question, but I guess I wasn't clear enough. And again, it's so far into the future probably that, so, on this, when it says street lighting, and I was talking sort of specifically with the things that have risen to the top, which are street lighting and, sidewalk infill and improvements for pedestrians. This says $70,000 per intersection and $150,000 per block. I mean, obviously it would be great if there was like, here's $10 million, do all the lighting at once, or, here's 1 point, whatever it is for to fill in all the sidewalks and improve all of that. Are you saying that the sort of ranking of those sections, then everything would go into that ranking? Does that work for lighting as well?
I think what we would have to do is take a look at what the Neighborhood Advisory Council suggested and see where that falls in concert with what the residents were requesting and putting together a potential funding strategy that could be presented to the City Council. It's a policy decision whether or not they want to use general fund money for these type of purposes, because they have not. We have the half of the utility users tax that goes from the street fund, as well as the Measure A monies. The other option the council does have is the community development block grant money. They could say, we're going to set aside $120,000 in 2015 to do the lighting study. And then city staff, you got to figure out how you pay for it after that, or apply for grant money annually until you get it done. But just on a $10 million figure to do the entire neighborhood, I was doing a real quick back on a napkin calculation yesterday with Jessica. If we only got $150,000 a year to do lighting based on current year's numbers, it would take us about 66 years to do that neighborhood.
Right.
So that's not a good strategy. So we would have to prioritize the streets where we would want to do lighting. But this is no different than any other neighborhood or the city in general in terms of not enough money to do the capital needs. So, one thing that we had looked at is, well, maybe we can just get money just to do all the pedestrian enhancements to make the residents feel more comfortable crossing the street. But that's, just under $1 million that we're talking about between the intersection that Derek recognized through his analysis, as well as the streets that the residents have requested that we do improvements on. So it's going to be a challenging conversation for council, but it's going to ultimately be their decision.
Okay. Great. Yeah, Ms. Horn.
Just a lighting question. On the document here, on page 22, there's the improved street lighting map. And on the legend, it says, the yellow is city street lights existing, and the orange or whatever color it is Southern California Edison street lights existing. And I just wondered, what is the role of Southern California Edison? And it says they have existing ones. Does that mean they put them up? Is there a possibility that they would put up more? I just don't understand that.
The way it
role.
works, if there's currently a Edison-owned utility pole out there, they can put a street light up based upon our request, and then we pay for the power. And there's a flat rate they would charge us for that. If there's not an Edison pole up there, then we have to put the light in. We have to bring the power in, bring the pole in, and install the light. And so there are a number of existing utility poles. Basically, if you have a neighborhood where you have a lot of overhead power line, there's most likely going to be a utility pole someplace that's owned by Edison, and they can install a street light on that type of pole.
Oh. Okay.
And are there any utility poles out there, like I would imagine, the ones on corners that are up probably already have them, but any mid-block poles, like, has there been an assessment of how many utility poles are out there with no lights on them as of now?
I know our facilities manager was doing that. I don't remember what the outcome of that is. It's something we asked them to take a look at, is what's existing in terms of lighting, what are the opportunities to have Edison install lighting, and if there's any poles out there that the city owns, what's the opportunity for us to install lights on those as well. I know he did the survey. I just don't remember what the results of that was. Right. But that's something that's part of our Just Do It.
Yeah.
If we have Edison poles out there with no lights on it, talk to Edison about getting the lights up.
And I know that our facilities manager has also had been coordinating or continues to coordinate with Coast and the East Sidewalks program over the past couple of years, and he's participated in nighttime walks with the East Side residents and Coast members, looking for those sort of just do it fixes. And so we'll continue to take comments from there and input, but most of those just do it have been completed. And there was a couple street lights that were out that were reported at the workshop that have since been repaired. And a lot of this, we really do depend on the East Side residents to be our eyes out there, because there's a lot of city streets and city lights, and so we depend on the residents also to help bring, if there's any lighting issues, to our attention. And as we move forward with this in this effort, Southern California Edison will continue to be a partner in this effort.
Great. Other comments, questions? Okay, so motion would be in order. Yeah, Mr. Coffin-Gray?
I'll go ahead and move that the Transportation Circulation Committee find that the East Side Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan consistent with the general plan circulation element, and recommends to council to adopt the plan.
Is there a second?
Second.
I second it.
Susan gets it.
Okay. Susan can have that one. All right. All right. Any further discussion on the motion? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right.
Chair, before we close, I'd just like to recognize Jessica Grant. She was the project manager on this effort. She did an excellent job on this planning effort. Also, obviously they're not here, but we did have the school district, the principals of the 3 elementary schools in the area, as well as the middle school and junior high school, that assisted us in getting the word out, and the principal at Franklin School provided the facility for us to have these meetings. So good partnership, as well as Coast and the Bicycle Coalition, and getting the word out to the residents and their participation in doing the East Side Walk. So it was a really good community effort, and it's probably one of the better efforts I've been associated with in my time here with the city.
And one quick question. Maybe you said it and I forgot, but as far as starting the bicycle master plan renovation, when do you expect that to start?
In fact, we had our kickoff meeting internally this week. We're putting an RFP together. We're hopefully to have that out this summer and have a consultant selected this fall so we can get going before the holiday season. So at least have the consultant selected.
Great.
So.
All right. Motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Second. All right. No opposition. Great. All right, we're adjourned.
Are you sure you guys don't want to stick around?